Hi, everybody. It's Mike V3MW. And normally I'd be standing up here on the stage with you, but due to a few circumstances beyond my control, I wasn't able to make it to Dayton this year. So we're going to do the next best thing, and we're going to do a talk on a remote. I'm just going to happen to be a remote. So the goal of my presentation today is to give you some ideas to get started and help you build out your own station, some significant things you need to think about, and where to get some other ideas. Every remote HF station is different. They're like a thumbprint. What's important to me may not be important to you. But what I hope to do is to give you some ideas on how to solve some key things, how to build a good foundation, a few other cool parts, and then some areas where you can go to get some additional information. So without any further ado, we will move forward on our presentation. So what is remote HF operating? Well, for the last 100 or so years, or back all the way to Marconi, ham shacks were the nerve center of radio operating. You had a place in your basement, you brought in a whole pile of cables from antennas from everywhere, and as antennas got further away, we used more and more expensive cables, and all feed lines and everything led to the ham shack. The power led to the ham shack. It was a dedicated operating location buried in some part of the house. Some of us were in basements, some of us were in garages, some of us were in HF or in sheds in the backyard, depending on your atmosphere. And I know when I first started, my first ham shack, it was in a crawl space. And I'm still amazed to this day that I was able to drag around a Model 28 teletype in a crawl space and get it on a table. However, today, the ability to remote is incredibly mainstream. We have many different radio vendors building radios that are internet aware or ethernet aware and allows us to connect to them remotely. We're seeing that ethernet is replacing RS-232 as the way to communicate with different hardware. Antenna switches, amplifiers, radios. Users use ethernet to connect to radios now, and which is wonderful because it allows us to grow. Things get so much better, and we're not limited to the part of RS-232, which is an incredible point-to-point type of communication tool. Not really scalable is what we call it in the IT world. And you can make a simple installation with a radio and a multi-band antenna and be incredibly successful just by setting it up and being able to operate remote. So why do you want to do a remote station? Well, maybe we've got noise and you just can't hear any signals. And I know when I first moved from one part of Toronto to another back in 2005, that was a big case. We were in a new house for a week, took a hunk of wire, tossed it over a tree in the backyard, hooked up my FT897, and I went, wow, 40 meters must be dead. And it was then, even that far back, that I was incredibly exposed to the urban noise that most of you are dealing with. Um, so I wasn't operating that much. I was operating at friends' places. I'd go to contests, and it was cool. I got my fix. But that was about 2005, and then we had a cottage or a camp or whatever, second property, and I operated from up there on the weekends when I could, but it was closed in the winter, and that's where all the contesting was. You might be in a location where you just can't put up a good antenna. It might be a small house, a small yard. You've got laws that say you can't do this or that. So this may drive you down another way. You may be downsizing. Maybe you're moving from an apartment or from a house into an apartment building, or maybe assisted living, and so that takes you off the air. And for a lot of us, ham radio has been a part of our life since we're kids. It's been our social engineering tool, and we communicated with our friends or the rest of the world. We met new people. Maybe you live in an HOA and you're trying to do stuff in an attic, and I did a survey a few months ago, at least in the US, and what's the story? 1 in 4 people live in an HOA. Oh, it's a bigger number than I thought. Not common in Canada, pretty common in the United States. Maybe your buddies is shut in. They've had to move to something smaller or assisted living, still wants to get on the air. Maybe you can lend them your station by using the tools available by remote connection to your HF station. Or your friend just can't build a station. Or another thing that I haven't gotten a slide is a great Elmering tool. Maybe you can get new young blood, some kids. Those are the ones under 40 involved in ham radio. We're all getting older, but we still need new people in the hobby. And as I said before, maybe, my new QTH is an apartment. Well, you can do mag loops and stuff and get on the air, but maybe you want some more. And maybe you're just bored and want to really exploit things, and your hobby needs a hobby. And that's the beauty of ham radio, is there's just no end to it. It goes on like the universe. There's just so much parts of ham radio. So those are some of the things that I think of when I think of remote. While you're sitting here, you may come up with some other ideas that are remote to you. Just keep them in mind, and we'll talk about them at the end of the presentation. So, what types of remote are there? Well, we can have, I just want to operate. Well, I want to get into the ham shack because it's in a crawl space or the backyard or the basement or a shed or anywhere. And maybe I just want to operate from the backyard, or somewhere a little nicer. I was a camp counselor forever ago, and this is an interesting story. And it was a long time ago in the mid 70s, and they let me bring my DX40 and my HR10B to this place in a remote island in the middle of nowhere. And it was a big camp. It was a boys' camp, but they let me. They put all this stuff up, and I remember asking for, well, where can I operate from? And we walk around. They were incredibly accommodating, and we found an outhouse. Wasn't used anymore. It was all closed down, and didn't smell, but it was that structure. And they gave me this building with a lock on it and some power, and I operated all summer from that. And I got new kids involved in HF radio back in the, so it was 76 or 77. I'd only been a ham for a few years, and in Canada, and all I had was our basic was 10 words a minute, and that's all I could operate with CW. But you know what? It was cool. I was on the air. But getting back to, first part of HF remote operating, maybe just to get out of the ham shack. Maybe your antenna system is getting further or further away from the house because you want to get away from the noise. It's a lot easier to run Cat5 cable or Ethernet cable from the base of your house over to a shed, maybe at the base of your tower. If you can get power out to there and keep it a little warm and a little cool, why not put all your radios back there? And it's a lot cheaper than running cables. Believe it or not, RF cables go bad. And I've measured them. I've had what I thought were pretty good RF cables. They'd been in place for 10 and 15 years. I'd pull them down, and now that we have the tools with mini VNAs or tracking generators to measure the loss through the cable, I had an 80-meter dipole cable that I was incredibly surprised after I measured it that it had, where it should have half a dB of attenuation at 80 meters, actually had 7 dB of attenuation at 80 meters. It was amazing when nobody could hear me. And it was only a 130-foot run, which shouldn't be an issue. So I picked up some LMR 240, which was lighter than the RG 213 that it was, or RG 8, I guess, and replaced it. And unbelievable performance improvement. Maybe I want to build an HF station. Maybe I've got a second building or a property or something within, or a friend's property within a couple of miles or a 20-minute drive. Well, that's easy to build out and easy to test and easy to do things for, especially if you have a problem. Because with every HF station, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, Murphy's an optimist. He's going to come and bite you in the butt. So things may or may not work. And you may have to go make a road trip to fix it or reboot something. And when you build and the further away you get, the more things you have to add. Like consider everything that you turn on and off or have to reboot. Well, it might take a road trip to go fix it. So you become very good at using web switches to turn things on and off. But this can scale. You can build this out as you get started. You can't do this all at once. If you do, it'll be a recipe for disaster. So that's one of the key things about making a reliable HF station. And maybe because it's in a remote, a quieter location. As I said before, you may want to share this with friends. And we've got, on the flex side, it's not uncommon for us to call. They got a bunch of guys, 3 or 4 guys. They want to build a little consortium, for lack of a better term. They've got a hunk of property and some internet, and that allows them to build a station that they can get up and going for a bunch of them to share, that's quieter. And remember, if you can't hear them, you can't work them. And we're all getting older. So what this means is we can't always build the antenna system we want. And we're going to want to maybe have a collaborative station, let's say a small club, maybe a big club. That's where HF remote becomes incredibly popular too. And then the next phase, you're into the last phase like me. I'm remote and it isn't close. I'm fortunate because it's an hour and a half drive to my station. Our cottage is closed all winter. Nothing's heated. I run everything in an unheated box, no special climate control. I've never had an issue, and it gets about as warm as 30 Celsius in the summertime. I just have multiple fan systems for the summer, and for the cold, I leave everything on. I find I get enough heat from PCs and power supplies. I use linear power supplies because they actually do produce heat, so I want that heat in my box. And but if I get something go wrong, it's an hour and a half trip each way, so 3 hours round trip. Fortunately, I don't mind the drive, especially when you work at home a lot. You're looking forward to getting out of the house. So, and for this, I built a real DX station. I can run SO2R if I want, and I can work a whole pile of people with it, and I can hear things. And case in point is right now, it's Thursday the 19th. It's at 8:20 here, and I am hearing some really cool 6-meter opening stuff. A little bit into the Pacific comes and goes on 6. I can hear it because it's quiet at my station. Others that are more urban have not been able to hear that, even though they may have better antenna systems. Let's talk about your levels of expertise. I'm going to sound a bit like a Flex radio commercial here, but it's with good reason. Something like the Flex 6400 or even a used 6300, very economical radio, makes a great remote radio. And if you're using a radio with an antenna system that's maybe 1 or 2 antennas or a multi-band antenna, it is truly a plug-and-play event. You can drop the radio down, you can hook up your 1 or 2 antennas, you can add a web switch, some sort of remote switch to turn the power on and off and reboot the radio, and you're pretty much on the air, ready to go. That's an incredibly rock solid foundation. You don't need to solder anything, and believe it or not, for the most part, you probably don't need to do any magical internet work. As you grow your station, you may need to then get a little more technical, and you may need some help, or you may have the skills, but maybe you're going to start adding multiple antennas. Certainly when you start getting more than 2 antennas, it gets a little more complicated. You may want to adding an amplifier or a rotator, and I'll give you some clues about how to get through that hurdle in a couple of slides. And then the last one is you're all in, you're fully integrated. You probably shouldn't be sitting here. Maybe I'll ask you as a guest speaker to come and join next year, and we'll elaborate on what you have done, because I do really want to hear more ideas. And keep in mind, at any level, we're all Elmers. In ham radio, we've been so good through the decades about helping other people out. I urge you all that to help or ask questions. Don't go it alone. Leverage all of us. We're all here to help. And that's one of the beauties of amateur radio is, where it's a great social group. Don't believe or read everything, don't believe everything you hear or see on social media type of things. We all have our trolls, but we'll work around with it. So here's some key bits. You really have to have a desire to do this. You really need a radio that supports remotes, and the ones I'm familiar with are Flex Radio, ICOM. I believe Yaesu's got a bit. I've got no experience with the Yaesu interface at all. Certainly Elecraft does with their K3 and their K30, and their K4 certainly will have a pretty good solution. They're still working on that. And, they're there. You just got to go look for them. And you need a site if it's not all in your own property, and then you need a way to communicate with it. First off, you'll see on some of my slides I have QR codes. If you scan this QR code or click on the link, you'll be able to go see a video of my station. It's on my QRZ page at VA3MW, but this will take you right to the YouTube video as well. I originally started back in 2005 with a TS480, which I thought was an amazing radio because all the CAT commands, the computer aided transceiver commands, were available on the RS-232 port, right on the radio. So that was a big step. And Ham Radio Deluxe, in its client server mode, where you'd run a copy at both ends, being the radio end and the end user end, allowed you to do a fair bit of work. And I used Skype for my audio. It could also do some CW with it. It wasn't great. It was sort of voxy, but I got on the air, worked some contests, started having some fun. So I was pretty happy with the way that worked out. I started to expand the station with KM-tronic web switches. I'll talk more about those in a minute. I learned about routers, and not all routers are rated equal. We'll talk about that. But here's where I really learned that having a PC at the remote end was a must-have, and I'll explain more why doing that. And don't let that part scare you, because we've been running PCs and servers remotely and banks and just about everything for decades, and that science is nailed. It's incredibly reliable. I know I don't want to leave anything at the remote end, but I'll tell you, a laptop that always starts up remotely running remote desktop tools is an incredible tool for a lot of different reasons, and I'll explain why. I ultimately expanded the station into running a stepper, a rotator. Now I have a Power Genius amplifier that replaced the KPA 500, or my B26 RF kit amplifier. And I've got some big tall trees, and I'm able to really leverage wire antennas. So that was pretty cool. This station really started to become a competitive HF station. Now the big problem was trying to keep my butt in the chair because I couldn't sit that long. But I DX and do everything, and so that worked out really good. So here's as I mentioned, some radios that I'm going to talk about for HF operation remotely. But I'm a little biased, but I'm also a ham, and I've tried all of them. Flex Radio by far has the easiest radio to integrate right now for remote HF, and it's not just me saying that. There are others saying that. It just sort of works, and it was designed that way from the ground up. Elecraft has a great solution for their K30. They don't make it anymore, type of thing, but it's available, and sideband CW, everything. And digital actually becomes a problem. Hopefully I can touch on that in a bit if you're doing FT8. They will have remote in the K4. It's on their roadmap. It will definitely happen. ICOM has their RSBA1 software for radios, for a fair number of their radios: 7610, 7300, 705, 7100, maybe even the 7200 type of thing. I know that Yaesu has a SCU LAN 10. I'm not familiar with it at all, but I'd love to hear at the end of this presentation in case any of you are. Remote Mig is a great piece of power black boxes where you take the interface between it likes control heads, and that's what Elecraft used, and it works really well with the TS480, FT8, 57, or anything with a control head where you actually remote the control head by plugging it into one black box. You take the other black box, you plug it into the radio. They're about $500 US a pair for both ends. You do require some network expertise to do that because it doesn't do any tunneling and everything, so you have to do that. So you can get creative with that. MFJ1234 Charlie, the RigPi remote station server. Not very familiar with it, but it's got a bit of a following. They've had it out for a number of years. Again, near the end, if anybody's using that, we'd love to hear your experience, how complicated it is, and did it work for you, type of thing. Remote hams with their RC Forb. You can Google that one and look that one up. And there's more and more changing all the time. We are hearing of stuff happening all the time because remote is becoming more mainstream, and we certainly want to hear more. And then there's the operator end. That's the part that you and I use. Flex Radio has the Maestro, which is a control head, big control head, and it will actually call home or connect to the radio in so many different ways, whether it's in your house, on your Wi-Fi, or half a world away. You can use a PC to communicate with the radio and run your digital programs with Smart SDR. Some tools with like Remote Ham Radio have a web browser to connect to radios and get on the air. That's a pay for service, and whether you like it or not, it's pretty successful. And think of it this way: you've got some money in the bank. You're in a assisted care living thing. You'd be happy to spend some money to get on the air and or whatever. So, and that's not really in conflict, I don't think, with amateur radio and the business. And I certainly don't want to go there because you're not doing business on the radio. You're just you've created a service for hams to get on the air. ICOM has their PC software, as we mentioned earlier. Marcus, our good friend DL8 MR8, has written iOS software for the Mac and iOS devices for both ICOM and Flex Radio. There are some people coming out with some Android solutions that are creative, some Linux interfaces and connections that are coming out, although they're really niche. They are there. None of the mainstream vendors are doing it yet. Maybe someday. I know in our world, the Flex Radio world, we'd be happy for somebody to pick up the torch and create it. We'd be happy to help them out. Flex probably will not do it themselves, but they certainly will make themselves available as a resource to get somebody who wants to work in Android or Linux going. And then here we come, the connection, the big part between you and the radio. So think of the radio on your network. The radio is a server. It sits on your network and it wants to communicate mostly outbound, which is opposite to everything we've done today. So the outbound speed of the uplink speed from your radio to the outside world is now key. As you're getting into this, I'm not just operating from home, but I'm getting away from home. And so how much do I need? Well, that depends on the equipment you're using, but I would say minimum 1 megabit's a good start. 5 is better, and past that doesn't really matter. And networks, like watching video, people say, well, I've had customers call me and say, my remote stuff's terrible, but my Netflix is great. Well, yeah, there's a big difference. You don't really care if your movie lags behind 30 seconds or so, but you do care if the QSO you're listening to lags behind by more than half a second or maybe 1 second. There are good and bad routers. I would stay away from anything inexpensive. There's in our forums, you can talk about routers. I have found a very good consumer-based router by IQ Router, by EvenRoute. You can buy it on Amazon. It's not that expensive. And it does a lot of things automatically. You can go look that up. Believe it or not, there are good and bad ISPs. And no matter how much you try, they're just terrible. They may be overloaded. If they're a WISP, which means they're a wireless ISP, you may find the performance substandard because they're oversubscribed. And a lot of these people never designed their network for the streaming we do today. Wi-Fi is fundamentally broken because we never really designed it for what it can do today. And there's a big difference between speed and latency. And there are also internet service providers that won't let you run a server at your end, again, like the radio, or maybe even a webcam for that matter. And you're going to have to check with your ISP. Generally, this is ISPs that use a technology called carrier grade NAT or CGNAT. Starlink is one of them currently. Usually, if you're using a cellular hotspot, that is a carrier grade NAT, and it's the type of thing where you may not be able to call directly to your radio. There are some solutions to work around that, and they're complicated and they're hugely latent. So you're not going to get your sub-millisecond response time. So how much do I need? Well, upload is going to be the key number. We all have lots of download, but upload from the radio, upload to the outside world. Again, it tests. It depends on your ISP, and I'm going to show you some tools here. You're going to hear about something called buffer bloat. If you've got bad buffer bloat, you're not going to like your performance. So you need good buffer bloat numbers and low jitter numbers. And there are good routers that handle this automatically, like the IQ router. So buffer bloat. What about buffer bloat? Well, you can go read about buffer bloat online. Just Google it. But if you scan this QR code, you'll be able to run a buffer bloat test. And the link is below it. And here is a buffer bloat test on my remote. I think I did the other night. It's a grade C. It's a grade C. A, B is better. It's not bad, but it shows that the some measurements in the bottom left that Web browsing is okay, audio calls are okay, but if it gets really loaded, it might fall apart. And because my ISP's a big long cable that runs all the way around the lake and I'm at the far end, sometimes I do experience some breakup and drop. I can't do anything about it. I just have to accept it. And the next thing, part of the foundation, is your jitter. Low jitter numbers are better. This is a jitter tool. And you can see in this that the jitter is down to 4 milliseconds, although at different times it can be a little bit higher. Those numbers aren't bad. If you start getting 100 milliseconds or higher, that's a big issue. One of the biggest problems that you may have is your router and your modem at the far end. How many times have you had to fix something by going to reboot it? Well, you're not there. And in my case, through the winter, I use Raspberry Pis for things, but I have my modem reboot every night at 3 in the morning. Just in case something goes wrong, it just recovers on its own. And this all came apart a long time ago when my modem went offline in the middle of the winter, and I phoned my ISP and said, "Hey, I'm offline." And said, "Yeah, Mr. Walker, no problem. We pushed some firmware out. Might have taken you offline. If you could just unplug it and plug it back in, you'd be good to go." Well, that was another hour and a half drive each way. So just the other day, I found this thing called the Easy Outlet 5 on Amazon.com in the US. I couldn't find it in Canada. It's $70, and you can configure this to automatically reboot your modem and your router, or maybe if the internet goes away because it pings things in the outside world, then to just automatically reboot. Oh, internet's down, let's reboot. I thought that was a good tool. Now, I've talked about having a PC at the far end, and this is one of the key reasons why. There is a product available by a ham called PSTRotator and PSTRotatorAZ, and we're going to talk about the AZ version. This is a great piece of software that allows you to turn relays on and off, to turn your beam, to control your stepper. You can use it remotely. It's got these little cool web page interfaces, so you can turn things off from a phone if you're far away. You may need some network skills, but all of this is very doable, and it's not incredibly expensive. And the author is amazing, and we could do a whole hour just on PSTRotatorAZ. It's got an excellent user group. They're on both Facebook and there's an email group. Good help and well thought out. And Kudrut's the author. I don't know how many times I've emailed him and said, "Hey, Kudrut, I got a great idea for you." And write it all up. And he gets back to me. He says, "Yeah, that's okay. I'm pretty busy, but I'll have a look at it." And like the next morning is, "Yeah, I have a new version. Download it. Give it a try." You need to support these people and pay them. They're worth every penny. And I think it's 29 euros or something, if that, 19 euros. It's, in the grand scheme of what we invest in our hobby, incredibly little. I use these interfaces to turn things on and off. You need to just visualize, as I said, anything you need to power cycle, whether it's a DC power line, whether it's an AC power line type of thing. The one on the top right, which I understand is out of stock at the moment, will plug right into a Raspberry Pi and turn on power things on and off. I use a lot of those, but I bought about 4 of them. Microbit makes an incredibly great remote web switch. And you can run to 110 volts. Well, you shouldn't, but through them, the relays will support it, but it's probably not supported by your in your county or whatever, by your government. So you may have to control different types of switches. But if you're creative, I didn't say a word. The KMtronic switches, as I mentioned, they've got a variety of different ones. The one on the bottom right is incredibly popular, the digital logger IO switch. You can connect to it from a web page. Type of thing. Another thing we could probably spend an hour on its own discussing. There's hundreds of Internet of Things web switches from on Amazon that make it easy just to turn power supplies on and off, type of thing. And you can search for those on your own. And there's the links to them. And when you download this, you can go look and find a whole bunch of your own solutions. Again, at the end of this, maybe we want to hear about your favorite. Okay, with Lightning, I can only spend a minute on this, but great document at the bottom. There is no app that will take your feed lines and toss them out the window. I have no good answer for you. You're going to roll the dice. I have been, touch wood, lucky so far. Others have not. There's some great do-it-yourself solutions that part the feed line by 6 or 8 inches type of thing, and other cables. Not perfect. Nothing will survive a direct strike, but that may help with a static discharge. All right, going to spend a few minutes on this, and that's why do we put a PC at the radio end? Well, in my case, um, it was to originally run Ham Radio Deluxe. But as it turned out, I found out I could do things like control. I could do debugging on my network. In the Flex Radio world, I could update my software on the radio. Uh, Today, and I'm going to show you in a coming slide, how I run all my digital programs, FT8, WSJT, N1MM, even on the PC at the remote network. And I happen to use either AnyDesk or VNC, believe it or not, to connect to the remote device. And it's just like being there. It allowed me in the early days when there was no remote software to have all my little application programs on this PC. Software for the KPA 500, software for the stepper. I had temperature gauges, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? You only then have to maintain one PC to operate. I've had friends use my station for contesting, and it's great. They just connect to this PC and everything's configured like they came and sat down at your ham shack. And it also means you can sit down at your ham shack from anywhere. You grab another computer, even a Chromebook for that matter, and you can connect to your PC because it calls home technology type of thing. And it's not a bad way to go. In fact, it's really darn good. And as I said earlier, running PCs remotely is not a problem. Since 2005, I think I've had one failure where the PC didn't boot correctly. I fixed it. It's the type of thing you have to test. Every 4 or 5 years, I change the PC out. I run Windows 10 Pro. I don't have any antivirus on it. And it's if you power cycle, it comes right back up and works. Incredibly reliable. Bite the bullet, do it. You won't regret it. And even right now, this is from today when I was running all this FT8 stuff on 6 meters. And again, having it at the local PC means I'm getting the audio right from the radio and in the Flex world, right in the digital domain. And I'm not sending it over the internet. If you try to send that over the internet, because of the technology that's used, you will lose data packets or information, resulting in lost audio packets and bad decoding. So this gives me a much better performance. Even programs, other digital programs like RTTY or whatever will benefit from this sort of operation. So antenna control. Most antenna switches have 3 or 4 wires. You know what? You can change those with some relays to make it easy. Microbit has a beautiful antenna switch that you can control by web. I thought Green Heron did, but I couldn't find it. 403A, which is all designed to work with Flex Radio and OEM radios, ICOM, Kenwood, Elecraft, Yaesu, to automatically antenna switch. This will make your life a lot easier. Type of thing. We remote rig that's Microbit with their antenna switch. You can use PSTRotator. There's ways to configure it to control relays, to turn on power to certain relays, and you get the idea. That works really well. You can have radios send band data to antenna switches and a whole ton of do-it-yourself solutions. And again, you don't have to come up with this on your own. If you share with others what stuff you have lying around, maybe we can come up with some ideas that will work for you. So what do you do with power failures? Well, I run one UPS. The PC's on it. What else is on it? Because I use a bunch of Raspberry Pis. They're all on it, or they're 5-volt power supplies. And 2 things I've learned with UPSs. Some of them don't like the cold. When it gets really cold, they just shut off. And you want to make sure that they all start up in operate mode in case you have a long outage of hours or days, so that everything comes right back up. It's the type of bench testing you really need to do. And you have to try them all. So as you go to get started, you want to make sure that you define your goals. Start easy. Radio, multiple, 1 antenna, maybe 2 antennas. Test things on your bench, one at a time. Don't just set it up. And I hear this from our customers all the time. I turned on remote. I set up SmartLink. I got in the car. I got in an airplane, and I'm in Timbuktu, and I can't connect to my radio because they never tested it before they left. You need to do that. If you build this out as a good solid foundation, just of radio and turning a few things on and off and the ability to reset, focus on that part. The rest gets easier, becomes more and more reliable. Make sure you keep lots of notes. Do some sketches of your layouts, of your power layouts, your IP addresses, if you're hard coding IP addresses, your passwords. Another whole hour discussion we could just do on networking. And you need to plan this and think it out. I give Flex full credit. Long before I started representing them and working for them with Flex Radio, you could see that it was designed from the ground up to do remote thing because everything is done over the Ethernet. And I asked Steve Hicks that one day back in Dayton about 2012 or 2013 when I saw the new Flex 6000 series and had the radio in my hand and there was an Ethernet connector on the back. I said, "Hey, Steve, what can I do with the connector on the back of this?" And he goes, "Everything." And you know what? They were right. You do not have to have any network experience to set up SmartLink on their world. It automatically calls home. Don't need a VPN. You don't need static IP addresses. And if you go over to the Flex booth, they'll be happy to explain it to you. And there's demos. As you get into ICOM and remote rig, etc., they are requiring a little bit more network expertise. You may have to learn about Dyn DNS, VPNs, port forwards, all doable, and it's all on Google. It's easy to learn, but you do need to want to learn a little bit. I've been working on this document here. Again, something else you can scan or link on, sort of the basics of setting up a station. You can go pull that down. It's a living document. So as I find cool things to put in it, I'll just add it and you can just go refresh it. And then I can't go, I have to mention NodeRed. And that's an advanced thing. Now, NodeRed, and in my case, it runs in a Raspberry Pi. It's an IBM control software designed for machine-to-machine communication. But it really allowed us to say, hey, can you listen to the radio, find out what band I'm on, and when I change bands, can you tell my antenna switch? And it allowed people who are not programmers like me, I am not a programmer, I'm an integrator, to make this all work and write my own stuff. And you can actually do this. And it's all web-based. And if you can have a browser, if you can get to the GUI on your browser from anything, you can turn things on and off. On the right-hand side's I know it's a little eye charty to read, but that is a control panel for my HF station. I can read that on a PC, I can read it on my iPhone, my iPad, whatever. Works really well. And we have a group. I have a link at the end on how to get to the group. We are all about collaborating and teaching and learning and sharing solutions. There are a lot of solutions already in place that allow you to get going. Here's some links that are for some that I reference. I'm sure there's more. I'm happy to add them to my getting started document or even to this presentation. Facebook, there's a remote HF station building group. It's got about 500 members on it. It's a little quiet at times, but ask questions there. We're happy to answer. On the Flex Radio world, there's a whole community on remote operation. There's a whole remote rig forum, and there's that link. There's an ICOM RSBA1. I think that was the forum for it. Didn't look incredibly active. The RigPi forum on groups.io, the NodeRed users group on groups.io, and I'm sure there's more. And so what about me? I got started in ham radio back in 1974, and I'm still playing in ham radio, and I'm still learning new things, and I'm probably still blowing the odd thing up. But as I was told by a couple of Elmers, don't ever stop learning, you die, and don't get stuck in one part of ham radio. There's just so much of it. Heck, you're here at Dayton, so I'm sure that's not true, that you're doing a lot of things. I've got 4 videos you can go watch later on different parts of my remote station and how I did it. It's how I did it. Hopefully it gives you some ideas on how you want to do it. I started down this path in 2005. It's been a hell of a journey. And I get so much enjoyment out of it when it works. I love putting it all together, and and tinkering. And I've learned by a lot of failures, and as we all do, right? Failing is a learning experience. And if you want a copy of this presentation, you can go scan this code and download it. It'll come down as a PDF document, and there you go. So I wanted to take you. Thanks for listening. Hopefully, I'm here with you in this presentation, and we can have some questions. If not, my cohorts came over to back me up here, and maybe next year we'll have a chance to get there. 73, thanks for taking the time to come to Dayton 2022. And I apologize immensely that I wasn't able to make it down there, but one of those life things happens and I had to do the right thing. 73.